Interior Castle by St. Theresa, but I also try to make it intelligible by dividing it according to the 7 Morada, and also in comparison to things that you might be more familiar with. So St. John of the Cross, St. Ignatius, and purple, and Garrigou-Lagrange, which is one of the spiritual masters, and he talks about the different stages of interior life. Most of you probably have heard of the division of the spiritual life into purgative, illuminative, and unitive. And other division is the ascetic and the mystic. Basically, so this is kind of like correspond approximately to the first 3 Morada is we will be calling Morada as the dwelling place or the mansions of the castles. The first 3 Moradas would be correspond more like to the purgative, and then the 4th Morada is illuminative, and then the last 3 Moradas would be the unitive or the mystic. Last week I already started to talk about the first Morada, and I think it's good to have a little bit of overview and tie you over to the next basically 2 or 3 Moradas. I think most of us, myself included, are in the first 3 or 4 Moradas. So this is mostly what we experience. So I'm going to spend more time today on this. And then maybe next week we'll go to the 4th and then the unitive mystical experiences that St. Theresa has. Last week I was saying that even though we may not even get there, it's good also to be aware that this is possible and that is something that expects us, that's something beautiful there to go into a higher stage of prayer life or union with God. Now, last week I talked about, this is a very, I guess, schematic representation, and it's possible that you can skip stages from one to the other. You can, I mean, God can give you special graces and you can jump to like ecstatic experience and things like that. But it's important to also know that this is the regular way or the ordinary way by which one grow in holiness, in spirituality, in your relationship with God, right? So that there is actually a danger for those who kind of advance too fast or who jump the steps, right? Because in some way, normally, God works through the material that we are, like the way we are. And usually we need to purify ourselves in order to go higher. And the reason I'm saying that is because there are those people who are interested in the mystical state and started to read like high mysticism and things like that. But there could be a danger of what we call false mysticism, right? False mysticism is basically people who haven't really done the basics, and then they thought that they already have gone to high stages of things, but they're actually being deceived, right? So Chinese have a saying, "Mei hao han xin hok zhao," so it's possible that you started to run before you know how to walk, right? And so basically, you actually have false mysticism, or you could be even demonic. Okay, it's possible, right? So because some of these stages in the later stages, they're also dangerous. Okay, they're also dangerous, and so that's why it's also important to know that the beginning stages is usually what we go through, and they're quite important. Now, Saint Theresa also talks about the types of prayer that corresponds more or less to each of these Morada. So the types of prayer that I was trying to explain last time was that it's the way usually we progress in prayer. You start with vocal prayer, and then we do mental prayer, and then we do contemplation, and then our prayer becomes much more, she would call it much more contemplative, much more inactive. Basically, the last stages of prayer are much more passive. You don't really, she tries to explain that, the last, and she had difficulty explaining it because it's kind of like, it's a type of prayer that you don't do much. right? That you just let God pray in you, right? So you are already, that's why you have ecstasies. Ecstasies is when you're so taken up in the presence of God that you're out of yourself, right? You become ecstatic. So that's basically what happens. It's no longer kind of like words or songs or vocal prayers or even imagination. Okay, so that's basically what that kinds of prayers tend towards as we go. It simplifies actually. So I want to talk about this because I think it's very helpful to have an overview of the spiritual life and what this first stage of prayer, or the purgative or the ascetic type of prayer means. Okay, so the first three morada is more like for the beginners, and then basically you start. A lot of us begin with vocal prayer, praying prayers in the books, prayers that are given to us, prayers that we basically have a lot of devotion to, a lot of devotions. It could be the type of rosary or even chaplets and so on. There are many different kinds of prayer novenas, and we start with that, and that's good. It actually, after someone who's already in the spiritual life, they start to kind of say these prayers with a lot of devotion, and you feel very close to God. Right? It's a way of very, very tangible way of feeling God being close to you. Here, what St. Theresa and also St. John of the Cross talks about is basically here in the first three stages, you have active purification of the senses and of the spirit. Okay, so this is what is meant by purgative or purification, right? So you have to somehow purify yourself, okay, both the senses and the spirit. What do you mean by senses? Senses are the five senses: sound, sight, touch, smell, feeling. Okay, so it's something that enters into our soul. Okay, so we need to do that because for us to go inside the castle to our interiority, we know that a lot of times we get distraction. We get distracted by all these senses. She actually talks about the senses are like comes through to us through the windows, right? The windows of our soul are the senses. The senses in some way are important. They're not bad, right? But they can actually be bad. You know that things can come inside into our soul. Okay, some of things are nice, some of things are not so nice, right? So if in this beginning part, we need to purify our senses so that we become more attuned to senses that has to do more with God and less with the world. Okay, so we can think about it, no? Silence, okay? Silence means that, okay, you listen to God rather than rock music, let's say, no? Or music that is very loud, or you cannot, you cannot stand silence. You always need to turn the TV on all the time or radio on all the time. You cannot stand silence at all, right? So, for example, there's one sense that you have purified. Sight, same thing, no? We like to see so many things. We're curious. Today, nowadays, with social media, with internet, you're constantly curious and want to watch and see the more spectacular and amazing images, right? So those are the things that needs to be purified. And so we'll see how in each morada there's a sense that will be purified. And then the spirit that needs to be purified here, according to St. John of the Cross or St. Theresa, the three faculties of the soul, we call it spirit. It's basically things in red: the will, the intellect, and memory. Okay, the will, intellect, and memory. It's a classical division. So we probably understand what they really mean just by the word, right? So the intellect, for example, is truth, right? The mind goes after that which is reasonable, that which is true. And so it's a lot of that has to do with learning. A lot of that has to do with knowing about things around us. It's about science. It could be a lot about truth of reality. And so, but then, okay, in the spiritual realm, it's things about God and things about me, right? Knowledge of myself, knowledge of God, okay? And so here we're talking about how do I purify my intellect so that I see more clearly. So that's faith, right? How my faith is purified so that it corresponds more to the truth, right?
Excuse me, can everybody make sure that they are muted, because we have some background noise. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
All right. So that's the intellect, right? And so, and then there is the memory. Okay. Memory has to do with the fact that we have memories, basically, things that happened to us in the past. We have the memories allow us to have certain, especially desires, and has a lot to do with we'll talk about the senses, right? So something that happened to me, I remember that. Those are good things, attractive things. And then basically these desires, these passions, these happiness, okay, some of them are good, some of them bad, and we have to purify them to see them in the light of God, right? So actually the memory is the most, in some way, more difficult to purify because it's really me, right? Everyone has, it's more subjective than objective in the sense, right? So everyone has their memories. Nowadays they use the word psychology, right? Psychology, my psychological makeup based on my background, based on my upbringing, based on the way I was raised, based on my culture, and all these things becomes a baggage, okay? And that's me. And then in some way, it has to do with my relationship with God, right? How I understand myself, maybe not even understand myself, how my psychology works. It could affect my relationship with God. For example, let's say you are raised up in a family where you have some problems relating to your father. The father is too cold, or the father is not, being there all the time. So you can project that to your relationship with God the Father, for example. So your memory needs to be purified in a sense, right? That through faith, you realize, okay, that memory, even though it's true for me, but it's not purified. It could be damaging in my relationship with God, because I need to create a true understanding, a truer memory, which is basically how God is, who God is, and how God really is providential and loving in my life, right? So different kinds of memory. So that's another part of the spirit or the human faculty that needs to be purified. And then the third one is the will. It has to do with our motivations, our intentions, our action, right? So it's something much more active. Like the will is something like you act on it, but that's also where love becomes manifest, because the memory is more like about desire. I would like to, but the action, when it is translated into something active, it becomes basically the operation is the will. I want it, and I'm going to go for it and do it, okay? So here, last week, I already talked about a little bit how all these faculties, okay, are related to faith, hope, and love, to the cardinal virtues of justice, temperance, prudence, fortitude, and also to the 7 deadly sins, or the cardinal sins, our deformed passion, and so on. So this is basically what happens in the first 3 mentioned. We call it ascetic or purgative. Means that we need to, through prayer, okay, purify ourselves in both our senses and our faculties of spirit, right? And so how does it work? How does it work, right? So vocal prayer is the one that we talked about in the first Morada. So here, the faculty that is most exercised is the will. Okay, usually people don't have a lot of difficulties praying the vocal prayers. They would spend a lot of time on every day. They would have a schedule. They would have the rosary. They would have. So here, the will is strengthened. Okay, it's strengthened. But then, in some way, the other 2 faculties are not as developed, right? So here, the intellect, you don't have to think too much when you pray. You just recite it, right? Just recite it, and then but in some way, eventually, you want to exercise the intellect, because you're just saying it, Hail Mary, Our Father, Our Father. But then, if you don't exercise your intellect, it becomes just repetitive, right? It becomes really boring, right? So in some way, the idea of the vocal prayer is that it actually supposed to purify your intellect, so that you mean what you pray and pray what you mean, right? So you say, Our Father who art in heaven. So Father. So you say, Our Father. Say, God is my Father. God is our Father. And then you try to reason, okay, what does Father mean? Is he really my Father? I mean, and all these things are there, and then you try to purify your intellect. So you can, okay, through the will, through the vocal prayer, okay, purify, okay, your intellect in the process. And here in the first Morada, the senses that is purified is sound, okay? So remember, when you start praying, the thing that you try to attain is silence, right? So here, on the one hand, it is both the hearing and the speaking, right? So here, the words that come to you, okay, you want to kind of, okay, eliminate a lot of noises, extraneous noises that doesn't help. Maybe your sense is purified, so you will basically like silence, or you like different kinds of sounds, maybe music or classical music rather than rock music, and so on, right? And basically, most important sound is basically maybe liturgical music, and so on, right? Or the Word of God, right? So both the listening and also the speaking. Your speech, okay, is also sound, right? So your speech, what you say, how you say it, and your tone, all that is also being purified in the process in this first Morada, okay? Anything that has to do with sound is purified. So this is the first Morada. In the second Morada, okay, a lot of people, actually, there's another thing that St. Theresa talks about, is that from going from one Morada to the next Morada, there's also a bit of, should we call, crisis or resistance. Okay, we don't really like to go to the next Morada, because once we're in the first Morada, we are comfortable, or we're used to this way of praying, this way of relating to God, and to go to the next Morada actually could be costly. Or you're afraid. You feel that you don't need to, or you don't want to, right? So to go from vocal prayer to mental prayer is hard for a lot of people. I mean, I talk to a lot of people. They say, yeah, I like to do all these different types of prayer, if you want me to just pray on my own, do meditation, mental prayer, I don't know what to do. I don't know, like, what should I pray? What should I meditate on? Like, I mean, how could I just spend half an hour doing nothing? Right? They feel like they do nothing, right? So that's kind of like a challenge for some people to go from one type of prayer to another type. Because on the one hand, vocal prayer, you know you're doing something physically. You're reading, you're praying, you're doing the novena, you're doing the rosary, you're doing all these things. It's very active. You can see the results, at least in terms of results in terms of I've accomplished this. Mental prayer is less that, right? So here, that's why it's more complicated, because now, okay, let's say you say, okay, I've decided to do adoration, right? Adoration is harder. It's more like a mental prayer. You go there and then you pray. It's like, but a lot of times we still use a vocal prayer. Okay, adoration, I just bring all my prayer books so that I can read, right? Do my prayers. But then it's harder to do mental prayer, because there, basically, you have to exercise your intellect, right? So typical type of mental prayer would be something like Lexo Divina, or meditation, right? The idea with that is that you're not just not just saying the words, but you try to go deeper into the meaning of these spiritual realities, right? So here you're exercising your intellect in the sense of faith, right? Intellect to know about God and things around God and spiritual truths, right, about God. So basically, that's why either the Bible, if the Bible is too hard, it's a spiritual book. You do meditation, you pick a passage, you think about it, you pray about it. And so in that process, for example, Lexo Divina, the many methodology of mental prayer or meditation is called, one is called the discursive affective. So you read a passage and then read it again, and then look at the part that stands out to you most, and you go deeper, and you just dwell there, and then you go from the meaning, okay? So the meaning gives you, okay, that means that. I never thought of that. No, for example, use our Father. Father, right? Our Father. God is our Father. God is just, you can say, oh, it's not just my Father. It's our Father. It's Father of all of us, right? So you can go that way and say, oh, so we have the same Father. That's why I don't pray my Father who art in heaven, but our Father. Right? So there's already kind of like an intellectual light, right, to realize that. And or we can go to Father. Okay, fatherhood. What does fatherhood mean? You can go deeper into that, and how does Jesus relate to his Father? Jesus calls Father Abba, and so on. So we can. Mental prayer means that you use intellect to analyze, to rationalize, to kind of tease out the deeper meanings, and from there it becomes kind of like a truth for you, right? So I learned this truth, and becomes something new for me, a new light, and I assimilate it, okay, into my intellect, so that, for example, I would try to, pray Our Father in the future. It would have a special meaning for me, right? So here, you exercise your intellect and you purify your memory. For example, the example of the Father, right? So once you have done that exercise enough, you realize you purify that, okay, the fatherhood of God is different from my Father, right? My Father, because it's purified, right? It's been purified, so that I realize that I cannot use my relationship with my Father and project it to God. It's the other way around, right? What is more true is God's fatherhood, which is much more universal, and that fatherhood applies to me, and I can see my notion of the fatherhood based on my limited memory, okay, is insufficient. So that's a process of purification of my memory, okay, in mental prayer. So you can do that with a lot of things, right? The Bible is very rich. There's a lot of spirituality. And so here, once again, it's a more serious type of prayer. And why is this a more better form of prayer? It's because it's very, how to say, very personalized, right? I'm praying not just, because vocal prayer is usually given to me, right? Prayers that are formulas that are given to me and I just recite it. But it's not very individualized. It's not very personal. When I do mental prayer, this is really directed to me, and it's very personal, and it purifies my needs, my desires, my memory, okay, in the process. So this is the thing. Here, once again, you can see that your will is weak. It blocks you. Because here, once again, before, your will is very strong when you do vocal prayer. But when you go to mental prayer, I remember when I was in novitiate, we had to pray 1 hour of meditation every day. It's like, 1 hour, wow. Like, it's such a long time. What I'm going to do, 1 hour of prayer is every day. It's like, for the rest of my life, it's like, wow. Your weak is weak in the sense that you feel that you don't have the strength to do it. Like, what I'm going to do, right? 1 hour. So in the beginning, your will is challenged, actually, right? It's challenged that way, and so it gets strengthened in the process. Because if you're not challenged, okay, then you don't develop that part of your faculty, okay, and so you cannot advance. So you're blocked in that way. So here, basically, you exercise intellect, you purify the memory, and you challenge your will in some way, right? And here, in terms of the senses that is being purified, is sight, okay? So after sound, the next very immediate sense for us is sight. So here has to do with curiosity. Things that are beautiful, things that are nice, things that attract you. Today, I mean, sight and sound are very difficult to purify because of the internet. The movies, things like that, can actually disturb you if you let them in, right? So exercise, more discipline. So basically, another name for purification is discipline. So how do you discipline yourself? So that you would have set time for prayer, and then you block yourself off so that you don't get distracted by all these things that can disturb you, right, in the process. So little by little, you become to love silence. You wouldn't mind going to pray, go for a walk, you can pray to God, you can admire nature, you can admire silence or the birds or the rain or the whatever, right? Nature, right? And your senses are purified in the process so that you're more focused on things that are more spiritual. So another way to pray is in the Eastern tradition is the icons, So you hear about the Orthodox, basically, they pray with the icons. So it's a way to purify the sense of sight, right? So here, you're trying to go deeper through the senses into the truths about God, right? Through the icon, right? Something very orderly, something very beautiful, something that is deep and it resonates with you, okay? So that's the purification of the sight. So here, let's see. Saint Theresa also uses two other things in her description. One is the slogan, okay. One is some symbols, okay, or persons to explain certain spiritual truths to it. So here, the example of the prodigal son is basically someone who has to somehow purify himself. Prodigal son. Let me think. I'm forgetting. Oh, okay, the prodigal son is basically someone who has, in a negative example, right? Someone who did not choose, okay, the good part, but chose to be away from the father, right? So that choice for him was disastrous, right? So basically, she used that as a negative example. The other example of the soldiers of Gideon, basically, remember the story about Gideon, where basically the number of soldiers was reduced from 30,000 to 3,000 to 300 or something like that. So this is a kind of like for Theresa an example of choosing, right? Of making the courageous choice in this Morada to willing to fight in prayer. Okay, prayer, as you know, is a battle. You read the Catechism of the Catholic Church. That's the spiritual combat, and when you start really to pray, okay, it becomes a battle. A battle is a combat, because when you try to purify yourself with all these defects that you start to notice, then there are temptations, there are attacks, they're actually what we call you fall sometimes, you rise up again, keep going. So it's perseverance, right? So in this stage of your spiritual life, you realize that just like a castle imagery is defensive, okay, but then you also have to attack, right? So all this part called in the purification, we need discipline, we need a lot of vigilance, you need help with maybe spiritual guide or companionship with other people who are praying with you. So many things are available, but it is kind of like a spiritual combat. Ephesians talk about that, put on the armor of Christ when you fight, the helmet of faith and so on. So this is a spiritual combat. The second Morada has to do with purification, and problem is that the enemy is within. It's you yourself, with all these memories, these passions, these attachments, and these difficulties. I mean, this psychology you talked about, baggage, and then how do you purify yourself and become much more Christ-like? And then another symbol that she uses, okay, is a water imagery, talking mostly about prayer. Is basically she used different parts of the book, the water imagery coming back again. Later on, we see that is kind of like a fountain, but she changes. At one point, she was saying that, okay, prayer at the beginning is almost like you have a garden and you have to water the garden. At the beginning, you have to go to the well, you have to drop the water, bring it, carry it to water the garden. It's a lot of work, right? Hard work. And then after that, it could be like what we call an aqueduct or water mill. So the water is collected, so it's easier. Okay, you still have to do some work. Okay, you still have the water mill and the water runs. You still have to do some work, but it's less work, right? And after that, the image of a river. So now the water flows naturally. You don't have to do much, right? And the last image is rain. Okay, the water comes from the sky. God does all the work. You don't have to do anything. So those are different images that she gives of prayer. So basically, the last stages, river and rain, would be more like the last stages of prayer, which is more mystical. It's up to God to water when He wants to come and give you the water, right? So this is more or less the second morada of prayer. Here, basically, the slogan, she said, is humility. Humility in the sense that you recognize who you are, growing, growing in humility, growing in self-knowledge, being able to free yourself from all these attachments, to be through self-denial, maybe at times, but in order to achieve that freedom, so that you're not tied down by all these passions, okay, that blocks your growth. Okay, so that's second morada. Now I go to the third morada, which is, and once again, another stage of prayer. And once again, from those who are good in mental prayer, basically I would say most religious and priests would have had this formation in mental prayer. Or for lay people, if you want to do spiritual exercises, you would have learned how to do mental prayer. It's kind of like a retreat when you listen to talks and you meditate on that. And so you keep feeding yourself with all these knowledge about the Bible, so your intellect, right, grows. So you become very knowledgeable about your faith, and then you feel very close to God, even though He's different. Still, you're still not totally purified. So most people, a lot of us, I think most Catholics, they more or less between second morada in this stage. The third morada is basically, I think, something that current society needs a lot more. Okay, it's basically contemplation. Okay, there are different ways and contemplation. Contemplation is basically a way of praying that requires intellect. It's not so intellectual. Okay, you don't use as much. So you do rely on scripture, especially the gospel, mostly. So basically, enter the scene. I mean, the idea is that you try to involve yourself and place yourself in presence of a biblical scene, mostly the gospel, and just stay there and wait for God to give you an insight or a light, okay, which may or may not be related to the scene directly. It's totally unexpected, right? So I was helping some brothers doing contemplation recently. They were doing spiritual exercises. I was giving them instructions, and one of them was saying that they were contemplating the scene of nativity, Christmas. Jesus was born, and then he was saying that he was contemplating about Mary holding Jesus, carrying Jesus, right? And then suddenly, it became him carrying Jesus. That he was carrying Jesus, like he was asked to carry Jesus. It's almost like it moved from Mary being carrying Jesus to him carrying Jesus, and just stay there, carry Jesus. And that was his prayer. And that for him was important, possibly because of his need, right, to be touched, to be close to Jesus, the intimacy, for the presence of Jesus, baby Jesus, the innocence, defenseless, that kind of thing, simplicity. Maybe, I don't know what his needs are, but there was something that he just stayed there and he just embraced Jesus for the rest of the prayer. I mean, you could spend 2 hours just holding Jesus like that. So it's contemplation. Contemplation is not intellectual in strict sense. Imagining that you are there. The imagination is the beginning part, right? It's the door towards the mystery, right? So it's the mystery of the incarnation of the birth of Jesus that you want to enter, right? But the imagination, basically, you imagine that you're in a cave, imagine that you see Mary, imagine that you are smelling, the hay, or you seeing the cow, the donkey, and so on. So you imagine that, but the imagination is kind of like the door by which you enter. Just like in mental prayer, the passage or the intellect, okay, the intellectual understanding of something is the door, but that's not the prayer, okay? The prayer is actually through the intellect you enter prayer. Here is through the imagination you enter the prayer. Enter into some kind of dialogue, right? Prayer is meaning a dialogue or an intimacy, a relationship with God. So, here I just want to jump to something like I forgot to mention. Now, in vocal prayer that we talked about, the danger is that you just right? Just saying it's just like don't really mean what you're saying, and it becomes kind of like repetitive, right? And so that's danger, right? In mental prayer, the danger is to over intellectualize, meaning that, what does that word mean? Does it mean this way? You just go deeper and deeper and deeper. I need to do a Bible study, but it's not a Bible study; it's a prayer. Right? It's let's look at it. What does the original meaning? Look at the Greek dictionary and whatever. Right? That's the danger of mental prayer, is that you become too studious. You try to understand it too much, right? In some way,
analysis,
overly intellectualize it, right? So that's the danger of mental prayer. The danger of contemplation, or the third type of prayer, is too active and imagination. Okay, you imagine things, you stay at the imagination. Right? You say, I'm looking at Mary, she's got blonde hair or brown hair. I look at Jesus' eyes, she's got blue eyes or whatever. How tall he is, what is his voice like? I mean, you stay at the imagination part, but you didn't enter into the deeper mystery of the reality. So that's contemplation. Okay, the third type of prayer. Here, what you're trying to exercise is the memory. Okay, memory in a sense of, like what I said, your very personal background, your baggage. So it's a way of praying that uses your senses to enter, but it touches you deep into your memory or your baggage or your psychology, right? It touches you in a deeper way. Not just your mind, but it touches your heart. So that's the ideal, right? Usually it takes some kind of time for you to exercise that. Sorry, I think just went off. So you exercise that, and you become bias that you have, or these hurts that you might have had in your past life, gets cured, gets touched by God in a deeper way. And so you you heal yourself in the process. So here, in the third thing, what you see, your memory is exercised. The intellect actually disturbs it in the sense that it blocks it, because when you do contemplation, your tendency is to try to overanalyze it, right? You try to think, okay, too much, because it's a different way of praying. Because if you're used to mental prayer, okay, you're already trying to do that method. To change to a different method, which doesn't require your intellect, it's hard. Because it's, once again, it's like, what am I doing? I'm just sitting there. I'm just waiting. You become impatient because you're not as active. You're allowing God to shine light on you, on your memory, on your needs, on your psychology, on your baggage, so that you basically can enter into dialogue with God, right? It's a different way of praying. And so that's why some people find it very difficult to do contemplation, because they feel that it's so abstract. You know? It's almost like, I don't see where this is going. I don't know if I'm praying, right? Even so, that's the problem with contemplation. It's a more advanced type of prayer, but it's actually a simpler type of prayer. It seems simpler, but it's also more difficult. It seems a contradiction, right? So in this Morada, the images that Theresa used is the rich young man talking about generosity, that you have to give it all, okay? That you have to give up everything, right? Give up your possession. So you have to detach yourself much more, becoming more generous. The rich young man was generous, but that he was still attached to his riches, right? King David, because it has to do with your senses. I mean, King David he loves God, but he also loves what we call the woman, right? Bathsheba, right? So that's the example she gave. So I forgot to mention about the senses that is being purified here is touch and taste. Okay, so here touch and taste has to do with another need that we have, the need to be touched and to touch. Right? It's a very, very, I mean, now in this period of social distancing, we notice that you're missing that touch, the human touch, right? And so here, it could be, I mean, touch needs to be purified. Could be so many things, right? A lot to do with our body, the bodily senses, and once again, in some way related to our sexuality, right? So that's why King David is there. Okay, so he fell because of his he did not purify his sense of touch in that sense, or sense of taste, right? So touch and taste is in some way is much more physical, but at the same time it's much more spiritual. It's more subtle than sight and sound. Sight and sound is much more immediate. This is in some way deeper. It's a deeper need for us to be touched and to touch, because it touches our spirit a lot more, the sense. So here, once again, the sense that is, because in contemplation, you actually enter by your imagination, which is also the senses. You try to imagine all these senses: sight, sound, touch, smell. Okay, you also purify the sense of touch in the process. And so one of the thing that especially St. Ignatius talked about in contemplation is that in the process of contemplation, there's St. Ignatius. Lost my train of thought there. Okay, maybe going back a little bit. In the third Morada, contemplation, a different terminology. Oh yeah, I remember now. Okay. St. Ignatius talks about seeing God in everything, or seeing God in everything, and that's basically the highest stage of contemplation, or the highest goal of contemplation, is basically the ability to see God in everything. Contemplation means that your senses, okay, help you to enter into an immediate presence of God in a much more sensible way, right? Sensitive way. So you see this, for example, in the case of St. Francis, right? St. Francis sees a bird flying in the shape of cross, and then he would think about, the cross of Jesus. He would see a worm on the grass, and he'll pick it up because it reminds him of Jesus suffering as a worm, because in the scripture it says he's almost like a worm, he'll be despised, right? So contemplation is seeing God in the little things and the big things, to be able to recognize God's touch, to be able to recognize God's presence in your life, right? So contemplation is not just entering into the passage of prayer, but it's a way of being, a way of sensitivity, okay, to the action of God in your life through big things or little things, right? So here it's more like a much more familiarity or intimacy with God. I mean, you know that sometimes in prayer, you would say, God touched me today in this way. And you just realize it in prayer. They realize that God was there. Or you say, God was trying to tell me something, I missed it. Right? It has to do with familiarity or intimacy. So an example I use a lot is kind of like, actually today, I was walking down the steps, and then the father was in the corridor, and then he called me. He said, Father Joseph. I said, how did you know me? He didn't even see me. He said, I heard you walking. It's the way you walk that I recognize. So it's familiarity, right? Because he recognized without seeing me that it was my footsteps. So prayer is like that. Like, just like, you hear something and say, that's God, even though you didn't see him, right? Or you, from distance, you saw someone's passing by, said, that looks like my friend, because you see the way he walked, or see his back, you see the shape, whatever, right? So that's familiarity with God. So seeing God in everything is a fruit of this contemplation. That familiarity, this ability to detect God's presence in your life, right? And then the other example of shepherds would be that of shepherds who went to see Jesus, and they recognize something special there happening. And that marvel, that ability to see the divinity of Christ in a baby, okay, is contemplation, right? The ability to recognize through the visible that which is invisible, right? So here, this is the fruit of contemplation. I think one of the things that this is me. I think today we have a lot of problems with internet, for example, with people getting addicted to internet, to pornography, to basically, I think the solution, sometimes we spend too much time on the other two faculties, which is the will and intellect. So you can fight this by the intellect, saying that, oh, I know this is bad. Okay, pornography is bad, so I shouldn't do it. Okay, you can give all the studies, all the reasoning, okay? Or you can fight it by the will. It's like, be strong, okay? Fight it. You can do it. Your will, right? But actually, it's the memory, okay, that sometimes is neglected. Okay, the memory, basically your deepest desires. We can talk about the psychology, your baggage, your needs, your wounds, your need to be touched, and how you can be touched. Okay, and contemplation is a cure for this plague, I believe. Right, this is something that I've recently thought about. That if you can teach people how to contemplate, to see the beauty of creation, of God, even beauty of the body, the female body, right? You see God in there, then you would not have, that kind of difficulty. I mean, I think it is there. There's something there. I haven't explored yet. This is just my theory.
Father, Father, I have a question to see if this fits with what you're talking about. So when you talk about like when St. Ignatius, he got in everything, and then St. Francis, when he saw the bird and the worm, he would actually see Jesus. So I was just, reminds me of talking about association. Theresa, Saint Theresa, the recent one, the one that is that works in India. Now I forgot her saintly name.
Oh, Calcutta.
Calcutta, that's right. Now she sees, whenever she's seen really ugly things. So, for example, people dying from leprosy, from the most disgusting kind of disease. When he looked into that man's face, the sick man, she saw Christ.
Right.
And then I remember reading somewhere in an autobiography, she said that sometimes she has doubts, it worries her. When she sees those ugly people suffering, sometimes she cannot see Christ, but the actual raw suffering. So this is the kind of a struggle she has, which reminds me of this third Morada.
Yeah.
How to see God.
She's probably in the high Morada, but her problem is probably dark night of the soul, right? Probably much higher, right? Much higher. And that's a common problem when you go up higher in the Morada. What she has is a different types of temptations. It's a type of, because basically, remember I told you that, I mean, she even thought that she could be possessed, right, at one point. It's because when you're in high Morada, you have all these extraordinary manifestations that you don't know if this is from God or from the devil. But that's in the fifth Morada and above. So basically, her problem is something else. I think it's not.
Long way to go.
We can go back to that later on.
Right.
Let's see. Let's see, what else am I missing? So in the third Morada, you're already beginning to have tests or trials. Some dryness meaning that you don't feel that your prayer is going anywhere, and that's common in the third Morada already. And then here, you also might have, St. Theresa called this spiritual adolescence. So basically, you're no longer a baby, you're no longer a child, you're adolescent. Okay.
The third Morada is already adolescent.
Adolescent, right? So
The
you're
third
still
one
not
already.
Yeah.
Oh,
Third
wow.
one, you're adolescent. Right?
Okay.
You're not adult yet,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not married yet.
Okay.
So spiritual marriage is the seventh Morada. Okay. So adolescence has a problem, which is she would say is in some way it has to do with the fact that an adolescent thinks that he or she is an adult, when in fact he's still an adolescent. Thinking that you're already there, that you don't need to go further, that you're doing well, right? So this is basically in the third Morada. So you basically could fall into a type of spiritual defect, thinking that you're there. For example, it's a type of pride, right? So, but it's not like a type of pride that is in the first Morada, when you are proud. Here it's basically saying that, I don't need to know more. I don't need to go further. I'm already very holy, right? That kind of thing.
Kind of unjustified self-confidence.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to pinpoint it because here, basically, Saint Theresa, and here basically, from here to the fourth Morada, there is a big crisis. Basically, Saint Theresa would say that most people stay there in the first three Moradas, and they don't progress to the fourth and onwards. Okay, this is a big problem, and I will go into that later next week, because actually in here you're in contemplative prayer, you're praying well, you're trying to see God, you're actually not far. I mean, you're still already very advanced in your prayer, right? So sometimes you don't feel that there's a need, or there's something beyond this. Okay, so this is something we'll mention the next week in fourth Morada. Why is it so few, she would say, who enter the fourth Morada and beyond, right? So compare this to, for those who knows the Ignatian thing. I made a correction here on my file. So the first 2 weeks, the first two Morada correspond more or less to the first week of St. Ignatius' spiritual exercises. The third Morada corresponds to the second week of spiritual exercises, which is mostly on contemplation. The third Morada, and the fourth Morada corresponds to the third week, which is the passion of Christ. So you have to go through the passion, and so this is where a lot of people don't want to go. It's the cross. And then after that, it's a resurrection, the fourth week, right? So basically, I will spend next week more on the fourth week and the fifth week. And if you have any questions now about what I've said so far, I hope it's been helpful.
I do have questions, Father.
Yes.
Okay, so the first Morada, you mentioned that, I don't know, somehow when you explain it, it seems to me like, okay, it's very, the most foundational kind of relationship with God. You sort of chant and use vocal prayers and all that. It seems to me somehow it's really more kind of collective thing as a community. Unlike the third Morada, the second Morada, when this is the time where when you say it's more individualized, that you have your memory, your intellect is being working in such a way that you begin to recognize yourself in the eyes of God or something like that. So I don't know if that works. So the first layer seems for me more, reminds me of my, younger 8-year-old like school days when I chant everything together in assembly and mass. Whereas really the second Morada is when I myself is more mature, that I begin to really, look at my own past experience and how I define myself, my self-knowledge. As you say, more individualized. It's the word individualized that really hit me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some way, the first Morada could be also not collective in the sense that you could do all these prayers on your own. Most of the time, it is done in community. A lot of these vocal prayers. But once again, it has to do more with the types of prayer that correspond to more or less to a state of your relationship with God, right? Rather than I think that's more the correspondence. I'm not sure if I'm getting your question right.
Father,
Yeah.
I have a question concerning about the stage when you say that people can see daily encounter as if the God's presence. How do you differentiate whether there is really an imagination or just really they see it, really see the person as he see God? Because what I'm saying, what I experience is that I have a friend that constantly seeing something. How can you tell that she is normal or not? I mean, in this case, because it scares me, because everything she see, the statue or person or anything, she would just say, oh, there is something like related to God. So I think by and by, I thought that either she's abnormal or too much imagination. I mean, how do you differentiate? People are really that high up, or
Yeah, you don't try to do that. I mean, leave it to them in the relationship with God. And basically, I would say that's why when you are in this this kind of, if you're really someone who's prayerful, someone should have a spiritual director, someone who could help them and guide them, and so that they would, because usually we are our worst judge, right? Sometimes we don't know what's going on with ourselves because we are not objective enough. So a spiritual director, a spiritual guide is important at the second and third stage already, I would say. Otherwise, you might fall into different kinds of errors or pitfalls, and that's possible. I wouldn't know because I don't know this person, right? But that's a known thing in spiritual life, that some people are, because of their baggage, some people are very, I know that some people could only do vocal prayer. They would not do anything else. Some people would do mental prayer, but they would not do contemplation. Some people jump right away to contemplation, but actually it's a very hyperactive imagination, and they just stay at the like what you said, no, very hyperactive imagination. So basically, someone who is very much sensitive to the spiritual realm, you recommend them to do other types of prayer, so that they will exercise more the intellect and less the memory, right? So depends on that. You give them the right dosage of exercise, and you warn them against pitfall, right? Without a guide, it becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think the imagination part. It's when people start saying that they start hearing voices, I don't know whether it's the actual voices or a kind of spiritual voices.
Okay, St. Theresa has a very good rule about this. Person usually, if she would basically say, someone who doubts, what she's hearing or seeing, it's more likely that it's authentic vision. than someone who doesn't doubt it.
Wow, it's the other way around. Okay,
Yes.
all right. Okay.
Someone who doubts it is most likely that
most
it's
likely
authentic. Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. That's the rule of St. Theresa gave.
Mm.
She has a lot of all these things, and she doesn't want them, and she doubts them, and she asks that she doesn't experience them. And that basically is humility.
Okay, all right. It's kind
She doesn't want to stand out. She doesn't want to stand out. Because for her, for example, she has some experiences of levitations. And for her, that was the biggest cross that she had. That sometimes she's cooking and then suddenly she goes in ecstasy. And she begs the Lord not to do that to her.
Wow.
Sorry, Father, I have another question concerning, you mentioned discursive. What do you mean by discursive?
Discursive is basically a type of reasoning, right? So basically, I give you the example of Our Father. I say, Our Father. Our Father. Our Father means not my Father, but Our Father means the Father of you and me. That means that we all have the same Father. So I'm doing a discursion in the sense of like a reasoning that is step by step. And then eventually, through this way of discursion, right, reasoning, it basically enlightens me and gives me a special light. God can touch me through my discursion, through my reasoning, and it touches me in the intellect and can go down to my heart and goes down to my will.
So what is the opposite of discussion? Do you have I couldn't catch your word.
Discussion, opposite of discussion would be vocal prayer. You say, Our Father who art in heaven, Our Father who art in heaven. But so it doesn't go through your mind. It doesn't go through your intellect.
Yeah, no reasoning. Yeah.
No reasoning.
Okay. All right.
No reasoning at all. But sometimes vocal prayer, I don't know. I find that vocal prayer, it's like after a while when you sort of chant it so many times, you want to look for meaning.
Yes, no, exactly. Vocal prayer is supposed to lead you in the direction of mental prayer.
Yeah.
So it is a natural thing that you do. So it's
a natural course. Yeah.
It's a natural
pathway.
Pathway by which it can. I'm not saying things bad. It's just a natural pathway, right? So
because sometimes I realize that what I do is that okay, I've been chanting all this. There's so many adjectives like Hail Mary, Our Father. There's so many adjectives in describing, referring the attributes of God or the attributes of Mary. So what I did, I look for action. I look for what am I asking God to act? Where's the acting verb? And I realized it's really not a lot because we're asking God to do something for us. We're asking Mary to do something for us, but we don't ask in the prayer that what should we be doing for God? What should we be doing in order to build up our relationship with God? I wish she did more so that
it's basically going deeper into the prayer. Like, I mean, for example, like I gave a talk in Dunn School just a few years ago on Our Father, right? When you pray, your kingdom come or thy kingdom come, what are you praying? You're praying that His kingdom will actually come on earth, right? And you ask yourself, how can that happen? What do I have to contribute for the coming of the kingdom? Right? So basically, do I really, I mean, you can either ask, do I really want His kingdom to come? I mean, I'm praying it, but do I mean it? Do I mean it? All right? And what does it mean? Or really, I'm just saying it. I don't really know what I'm asking. So, I mean, even that is already a discussion, right? So you go into that and go deeper and say, what am I praying? Stop. What am I praying? Do I really mean it? If I really mean it, what should I do? I mean, so that's already a deeper kind of prayer. It's meditation, right?
Because when I try to look for the action verb in Hail Holy Queen, I realized the only one is to turn thy eyes towards us. That's it. To turn thy eyes towards us. That's it. That's really not a lot of actions involved, but beautiful, beautiful prayer. But, you know, describing that we as, you know, exiled children of Eve, you know, in exile, that's very descriptive. But I was thinking that apart from description, what are the actions involved? So that's the one verb I found, to turn that eye.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on your depths, right? Even hail, right? What does it mean, hail?
Okay, hi. Yeah, respect.
Yeah, are you just saying hi?
No, just saying, all respect. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Hail, right? Hail is an action.
Okay, so hail is on my side. Yeah.
Yes, right. So what does it mean when I hail Mary? When I say hi to Mary? It's the whole spiritual and biblical thing that goes into that. It comes from Luke, right? Hail Mary, right? It's kaire, and it means actually something much more stronger, right? I mean, you can go into that a lot. I mean, obviously biblical studies would help, right? Knowledge would help, but you don't stay. I mean, if you want to, I mean, you can always go deeper that way. So that's a lot more to dig up, right? Excavate a different meaning. No?
Yeah.
Hail Holy Queen, no? Holy. Okay, what does it mean to be holy? Why is she holy? Okay, queen. She's queen. In what way is she queen? What does it mean, queen for me? Is she like the Queen of England? I mean, so many things, right? So just each word is a treasure trove.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And, I mean, that's only prayer. But the Bible, I mean, every passage in the Bible, every word in the Bible, you could pray about that word for like months and could stay there. I mean, obviously, the prayer originally, at the beginning, you probably need a lot more prayer, and your prayer simplifies so that when you go to quiet prayer, you will see next week, you don't even need so much. You just need one word, or you not even a word, or just one thing, and then that's it. Because your contemplation, you just kind of like holding Jesus, right? You know, Jesus holding you, whatever. That's it. I mean, you just stay there. So prayer becomes simplified as you advance. But so it begins with that. I mean, yeah, it begins with mental prayer, because in mental prayer already, you also, I mean, at the beginning, you probably need the whole passage, right? And then after a while, when you're good at it, you're happy with just one verse. Later on, you become happy with one word, and later on, you don't even need a word, right? So, so it is. I mean, this is the normal experience of prayer.
So it becomes more and more intuitive, or more and more. I don't want to use the word passive, but it seems that up to a certain stage.
Yes, it's passive. So you see this word comes up: active, purification of senses and spirit. The second part is passive. Okay, so it becomes passive as well.
Wow. So what about growing old? Growing old is something, you know, is like you couldn't control. So I was reading some prayers by a Jesuit, and he said, like, growing old is, you know, is a law of time, and you can't control it. And the more you see your body not being function the way that it could when you were young, so you begin to rely more and more on the hands of God. So it's, you know, the way, I mean, it's beautifully written, but the way he talks about growing old is by itself a kind of prayer where you become more and more going back, you know, like a baby.
Growing old, the question is not growing old, it's dying.
Yeah, that too, right.
and then basically our greatest fear is death. I mean, basically disease and death. But that's why in the fourth Morada, you die to yourself, right? So basically, through the death of Christ, you also die. right? In some way. That's why it's very difficult to go to the fourth Morada,
Mm.
because you're contemplating on the passion, death, and resurrection. So
Mm.
there is basically the essence, almost the most important truth about our faith is
Mhm.
there, but it's not just objective truth about Jesus dying 2,000 years ago, but me entering into that mystery, right? That I have to die to myself. So once again, there's a lot more to that, but that's kind of like the dynamic is to bring you to confront your own death and to be at peace with that,
Mm.
right? And that's basically part of a thing. So basically, one thing I didn't mention before, last week there was a question about what good is this, right? So basically, when you become, if you're not afraid of death,
Mhm.
right, you can do everything because you have become a true instrument of God, right? You're not afraid, you no longer have fear. You love God, your perfect love casts out all fear,
Mhm.
and you've died with Christ.
Mhm.
So basically, you say, well, what can I do?
Mhm.
Nothing. I mean, everything. I'm dedicating myself to God and whatever. I mean, what's the worst that can happen to me? They can kill me. So,
Mhm.
I mean, that's kind of like what happens with the spiritual life, and that's why St. Theresa is very interesting in the sense that she was saying that when you are in the fourth Morada, when you die with Christ, that's when you can start working for God. When you start doing apostolate, because then you are a pure instrument for God. Before that, you're still full of yourself. You're still doing it for your own, whatever, your fame, because you're still attached to so many things, right? So you're not purified yet to be a good instrument for God. But I mean, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Maybe there are other questions. Maybe because some of the other people.
Yeah.
Maybe in the chat. No, I didn't see anything in the chat.
No, not yet. Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone else?
Father Joseph, Father Tham?
Yes.
Yes,
Christina.
yes. Hello. So besides seeking the advice of a spiritual director, do we know where we are, and how can we confirm where we are? I know it's not like a competition or anything. You've mentioned before, just to help us see that there are higher levels to aspire towards. So in terms of, yes, pacing ourselves, or, what's the best way?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Just be careful, because in some ways St. Theresa warned against that. She doesn't want you to do that when she writes this work. She said she spent like 4 or 5 pages about that. That don't dwell on that, and don't ask that question too much, or don't dwell too much about where you are at. So because there's a danger, she sees a danger of trying to kind of almost like a human pride or human type of vanity, even to see where you are at and where you compare with other people, and where's my progress. So I mean, it's kind of like a paradox. Even though she writes this describing it, she also tells you not to worry too much about it. So it's kind of interesting. But you see the wisdom of her, right? Saying that don't worry about it, just try your best. In fact, when she talks about the going from the third Morada to the fourth Morada, we'll go into that next week. Basically, she's saying that you should not desire it. You should not push for it as if it is something. It is something because it's ultimately a gift from God, right? So she's saying that don't push for it so much that it becomes an obsession, that kind of thing. I mean, it's good to desire in the sense I want to be holy, but not to kind of like make it a possession. Like you don't want to possess God as if something I could show off or I could. I mean, because it's kind of like a paradox there, because ultimately it's a gift. Ultimately, you want to let go. I mean, part of it is abandonment, letting go. But in the end, if you let go, then you really don't want too much of this too either. So you let God take care of it. So there's a paradox there. It's hard to explain, but explains it quite well in her works.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll contemplate on that.
Okay. No, it's a difficult part that is good to explain, but that's part of the spiritual life. It's kind of like the asking question, will I go to heaven or not? Similar question. Like on the one hand, you say that, okay, that's a gift, and this is ultimately God's gift, that I will go to heaven or not. I shouldn't be too worried about it, but then you also should worry about it because you try not to, sin and so it's kind of like that. It's kind of like a tension there, right? That you try so hard, it's not good. If you're totally passive, it's not good, right? So that's
balance. Yeah, I think we're about time now. So shall we end with a prayer, Father?
okay.
Okay.
Name, Father, Son, Holy
Father,
Spirit,
Son,
amen.
Holy Spirit, amen.
Glory be to the Father,
And
and
to
to
the
the
Son,
Son,
and to
and
the
the
Holy Spirit,
as it
as it
was
was in the
today,
beginning, is
now
now,
and shall be,
and ever shall be, world
world
without
and
end.
amen.
Amen.
Name, Father, Son.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you very
Okay.
much, Father. That was
Thank
great.
you.
A lot of spiritual exercise right here.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we'll see you
All right.
next week,
See you
Father.
next week.
See you next week, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Bye.
All of them.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Tham.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.